Welcome to Neurosalience, the OHBM podcast.
Today, my guest is Michel Thiebaut de Shotten, who is a full professor at the French National Center for Scientific Research in Paris, where he heads the Brain Connectivity and Behavior Lab and the Neurofunctional Imaging Group. On top of all this, he is editor-in-chief of the journal Brain Structure and Function, and this year has been the president of the Organization for Human Brain Mapping. Having over 15 years of experience in neuropsychology and brain connectivity neuroimaging, he has established himself as a leader in the field with work that spans everything, including development, evolution, methodology, and theory. He's been a pioneer in probing brain connectivity and disconnectivity, starting in 2005 with a paper published in Science showing that spatial neglect is a consequence of the disruption of communication between the frontal and parietal lobes, and thus should be considered as a disconnection syndrome. Since then, he has been a highly prolific producer of creative, insightful, and high-impact work exploring and characterizing structural and functional brain connectivity. Here we talk about the development of his career and his ideas, as well as the importance of thinking of the brain from a connectivity perspective. We delve into some of his recent papers, including one that highlights differences in various MRI methods to measure myelin. And finally, we discuss how OHBM, the Organization for Human Brain Mapping, has evolved over the years, along with the evolution of the role of president of OHBM. So I hope you enjoy it. So welcome to the show. Just maybe to start out, as we typically start out here, just to talk a little bit about your history, how you got to where you are, what excites you about what you're doing, what motivates you.
So I did my PhD in Paris at the Salpêtrière with Paolo Bartolomeo, who's a specialist of spatial attention and hemispatial neglect. And during my PhD, I had the chance to interact with Hugues Dufaux, who's doing perioperative surgery. You know, they open up the skull and they use electrodes to stimulate the brain. He invited me for a surgery. And that time they were doing language only and motricity, but they never investigated space. So, you know, I tried to make the link between my PhD supervisor and Hugues Dufaux, and together we designed this task. The first time we went to the surgery and started to stimulating the brain, having like those deviations, that was insane. And then I didn't know at that time, but the specialty of Hugues Dufaux and really what he brought in the field of neurosurgery was like using the electrode in the white matter. And when he started putting the electrode in the white matters, and that's where we had like the most important deviation, like attentive disorder in these patients. So it's just temporary. And that's where we saw like there is really something going on in the white matter. And that's where I started, you know, doing some tractography, trying to understand how things were connected. There was like very few papers at that time. There was this paper from Marco Catani describing all these pathways, beautiful images. And in contrast, I had the papers from Maurizio Corbetta showing like those networks that were like different areas that were distant, but we had no real way. Well, we thought like there was white matter, but there was no mapping of how they speak together. So I started trying to develop a method to systematically map white matter pathways in the MNI space. And that's when I started my postdoc with Marco Catani and wrote the Atlas of Human Brain Connections using this approach. And writing a book is a unique opportunity really to test your knowledge and expand and trying to fill gaps between things that you didn't think about because you never had to put everything together. So I learned so much about, you know, writing and exploring the literature with Marco Catani, and you know, I will always thank him for many hours sitting down together and writing manuscripts. And yeah,
Okay. Okay.
And then I worked a bit with Declan Murphy, and he teach me how to write grants and how to like approach this kind of funding schemes that exist, which is a very different way of writing and bringing your arguments than when you write science. And if nobody explained it to you, you don't know how to do it. And then I had this permanent position in France. It's a contest, and I got it, and I took it because I was married. I wanted also to have kids, and you need to secure your position at one point.
Yes. Yeah.
So I
Well.
settled in France, and here I am.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. No, that's actually, and it's one thing that strikes me a little bit is that, with all the years of people doing, this temporary lesions sort of studies with interoperative surgery, they're never much focus on white matter tracks and your paper. So let's just start out with your paper. That I think that first, it was published in Science in 2005, and it really was a high impact paper, direct evidence for parietal frontal pathways subserving spatial awareness in humans. And that's exactly, as you described what you did. Uh, you were, stimulating specific areas and basically interrupting the subject's ability to, what is it, a line bisection task. So it's like while they're in surgery, could you explain that maybe a little bit about?
Yeah. I should have explained. So the line bisection is a way to evaluate if you attribute the same amount of attention in the left and the right hemifield. Attention being a cognitive term that probably doesn't match what's happening in the brain. But do you have the same weight in there? Spontaneously, we already have a distortion, so we deviate slightly towards the left of the true center. But if we have a lesion in the left or in the right hemisphere, we will deviate our estimation of the center of this line toward the side of the lesion. And that's because we compress space, or like the attentive representation, the weight of space on
Yeah.
one side compared to the other. It's quite a fascinating syndrome that is called hemi-neglect. It's it's
Yeah.
very impressive. And the way to measure it is a simple task. And actually,
Yeah.
a patent on the digital version of it, and people make fun of me because it's like, I can't believe you patented it live. It's ridiculous.
Incredible. So basically, they just have to find the center of like a line, and then to the degree it deviates, it shows well their spatial attention is off because they're estimating the left versus right differently. That's very cool because it's so elegant. And so basically, what you found, right, was that if you stimulated the certain specific areas, that was it deviated, but what really happened was if you stimulated the superior occipital frontal fasciculus, it went way off. And so yeah, that's
At that, and I had no idea at that time because that was my first paper. I didn't
yeah.
know if it was
It's nice having a first paper in science. That's a good start.
I think it's a waste because I really didn't even realize how big it was, and then I understood. It's just like they rarely did that in surgeries. It was the first time that we were bringing tractography in, and that was the first time that we were measuring visuospatial attention during the surgery, showing those results, and that's why it makes sense because it's new, different, from different perspectives. But again, at that time, I had no idea. I was just, curious and very excited about studying the brain.
Yeah, yeah, and and then you happen upon something huge, and then right, then your career gets rolling from there, and you kind of it's amazing how that happens. If just keeping, and also the idea that you just kind of tried something. I think that a lot of the really interesting avenues in science are found not by like thinking really hard and then doing that's certainly an important thing, but also just trying things based on sort of just to test hypotheses that are you just want to try it. It's
There is obviously a lot of luck in that
yeah,
domain. amazing. So I cannot deny this was the right person, the right time, the right question, and happened to work. But at the same time, there is a lot of passion and curiosity that I realize is critical to making discoveries.
Yeah.
So you gotta carry on and still being curious.
Yeah, I completely agree. And that's the thing. I think that's the art of, so other people might, stimulate the white matter tracks and say, "Oh, that's kind of interesting," and then kind of go on. And they have their mind fixed on something else, and it's just an interesting point, but then they brush over it. But that's, yeah. Whereas you took it and ran with it. So okay, so that was how you started. And so I now, since then you've published so many papers, and there's just a few that I'll get back to the white matter track mapping, but there's one that sort of jumped out at me as I was looking at, going in Google Scholar. That was interesting because it's been something that sort of has been bothering me as I've been following the field a little bit, and that is different methods for MRI to measure just white matter, myelin mapping, not really track tracing, but just myelin mapping. And myelin is a hard thing to map in the first place, and some people rely on myelin water. So you have this paper that you published in Brain Structure and Function 2023 called "Myelin Mapping Myelin and White Matter with T1 weighted divided by T2 weighted maps, discrepancy with histology and other myelin MRI measures." So there's a couple of MRI ways of doing it. One is right, looking at the ratio of the T1 to T2. You make these, I think a number of people, including Van Essen, have made these nice maps and relied on them. And then other ways are using quantitative susceptibility imaging and multi-echo to get at myelin water fraction as well. And you found that there's this discrepancy. So could you maybe describe that? Yeah.
We didn't want to look for this originally. I've seen because this paper had been taking 10 years to be published. It took a very long time, and I can explain why. But originally, we were very interested because I saw the paper from David Van Essen and Matt Glasser on the relationship between T1 T2, which is very simple, and myelin. And I was like, whoa! And we get the Human Connectome project. We can study the myelin of the white matter and start inferring about function and all these kind of things. So we thought about looking at the corpus callosum and try to map the myelination of the corpus callosum and compare it with all the histology stuff and try to think about the speed of conduction based on the myelination and the level of complexity of the cognitive function that we have to carry on and the lateralization and all these questions that we know in cognitive neuroscience. And then we're looking at the corpus callosum, and it doesn't match really all description of the axonal properties in the corpus callosum. So like we're very bothered. We're like, how is that possible? We're like, if we really want to prove, our point, we need to have at least like a couple of slices of corpus callosum where we show the myelination post-mortem and show that it match as T1, T2 in the corpus callosum. And then when we did that, it didn't match at all. So we had to repeat it in 3 different participants because we thought it's not possible. It's probably like a participant that doesn't work. And those 3 participants had similar pattern in postmortem, but that was very different from the T1, T2. And we presented those results, if I remember well, in 2013 at OHBM. We had an oral presentation, and we were like, surprising. I remember talking with Matt Glasser. He was like, "Yeah, it probably doesn't work in the white matter, but it does work in the cortex." I was like, I don't know how, but I guess we only measure the white matter, so let's stay friends, and we just mentioned that, and then it's been 10 years of submitting and having this paper rejected based on you don't destroy your methods without providing an alternate solution. That's how we started like collaborating with other people to get other kind of myelin measurement so that we can actually compare whether this other kind of myelin measurement match in the corpus callosum, and that's how we had those positive results for the other modalities. That was a long ride. That was very painful for the first attack. who had a lot of faith in this paper and seen like long periods of reviews that were not always very fair. And his paper systematically rejected by the field, where it was acclaimed at OHPM. So
That's interesting. And so now, I mean, now, it's sort of, it's out there, and I'm kind of curious to see what sort of impact it will have, because, a lot of people, obviously with we all know with MRI, I mean, there's always a certain amount of grain of salt that you have to take any interpretation of the signal.
I showed a gradient of myelination in the frontal lobe based on T1, T2 imaging in the cortex, and
Yes.
it's just the way it is. I mean, like, people gotta get worried. They gotta try to validate it in the cortex just to see whether it works or not. Are we just gonna carry on and forget about this paper because we step back?
Yeah. Well, that's how, that's the beauty of science. You can't really ever forget it. I mean, it always comes back if it's true. And this will be interesting to see, maybe it will open up the idea that, and I think you've hinted at as well, is that there's, there might be different types of myelination.
That's
And
right. The iron, the contribution of iron to the signal might be something. If you take those T1, T2 images, that's why we started being like questioning it a little bit. You go to the red nucleus in the brain. They're like bright spots. But not that much myelinated, but we call it red nucleus because in postmortem, when you slice, they have a lot of iron and start rusting, so it becomes red, and that's what they call red nucleus. Yeah, if they come out and they don't have that much myelin, that means that this T1 T2 is sensitive to other things than just myelin as well.
yeah, yeah, and then of course that's great. I mean, that's really interesting then, and to the extent maybe we'll have to revisit the histology and actually really characterize this further. I mean, there's papers on that, of course, but so, and yeah, Nick Weisskopf, for instance, is doing some of that, I think, as well, just to sort of get down to histology slides and trying to nail it down. So going beyond that, with other questions that were both in this paper and in other papers, you've done a lot of work sort of trying to compare. And I know that I've only seen work of mostly the work of like Olaf Sporns or other people who are trying to compare functional versus structural connections. And it seems that, right, when you characterize structural connections with white matter and you look at the comparison between functional connections, you see certainly a lot of overlap. But it seems that there are enough differences between the methods to suggest that there's something else that's determining this. And I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are on that.
All right, so let's start. Let's imagine that the structural connection and functional connection are perfect measure of the connectome in both situations, because there are also limitations in the method that can explain difference. But if they are perfect, the structural connection is going to show you the direct wiring between regions, and then the functional connectivity is going to show you the correlation. It's not really connectivity, it's correlation between brain regions, but they do not have necessarily to be directly connected. So those loops that are passing by the thalamus can connect regions that are not directly connected necessarily, and that's why we don't have a direct equivalence between the two.
Yeah.
So, combining the two might be interesting. We started doing this. We developed this software that projects the bold signal directly onto the white matter, and then you can revisit task related activations. Then you have tracks that activate when
Oh, really?
the projection change in terms of bold signal related to the task. Then you have the full tracks that comes out, and then we have a paper right now and under revision or under review, I don't remember, where we applied it to functional connectivity, and then you have the white matter tracks that come out with a network of cortical network. And so it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. But it's a work in progress, and we can technically see what is the connective structure behind the networks in a statistically validated way. And you can see, like, for example, for the default mode network, you have those lateral activation in the frontal and the parietal lobe, and then you're going to have those activation at the limbic and the medial wall of the cortex. They don't have direct connection. They do that through subcortical structures, and that's what we can see with these methods.
Okay. Okay, that's interesting. So there's two things that jumped out when when you were talking about this. You were saying that you're seeing bold. Are you seeing bold activity in white matter? I mean, that's something that a lot of people have been trying to do, and
Yeah,
it's
so we're not measuring the bold activity in the white matter, mostly because there is a very poor metabolism in the white matter. But what we're doing, we have a priori we created those priors of how the brain is connected, and then we project from the cortical regions the bold signal onto the white matter using very complex equation of weighted average.
okay.
Uh,
Okay.
and that just work. It's a bit what I did with the disconnector, projecting lesions onto connections, using a way to use a continuous measure rather than a binary one or zero, and which is a weighted average. And then you can run your stats, your statistical model as you used to do on standard volume of boards, except that they converted into what we call function nectar.
Well, that's great. That's really cool. And so okay, so the other thing though, it's actually you mentioned subcortical connections, and also, it seems to me that right. I mean, maybe there could be some real principle behind the functional connections that are not necessarily exactly overlapping with a single track, that they could be either more recently evolved, or maybe subcortical activity plays a large role in those connections. So there might be something to bring out in that regard. That's
So
interesting.
far, it cannot be wireless. Still waiting to see that correlation between regions that are completely wireless. Um, but so far, we think whether it's connected directly or indirectly, it is connected together.
Well, it's funny because you mentioned wireless. Makes me think about that there are some people. I mean, actually, I don't even know how valid it is, but there are some people who argue that conductivity of the brain itself. Just sort of, there's these currents that go along the brain that might cause or be related to fun. But I think that's clearly in the margins of what we understand. So
I'm a very curious person. I'm waiting to see the demonstration and being like, "Whoa!" I read
yeah,
recently the last book from Denis Le.
yeah, yeah,
He has this theory about the brain, and he compares
yes.
it with the universe, and like every neuron's got a chrono, and they have like time is relative in the brain. And I find it like fascinating. It is an interesting theory. I'm looking forward to evidence, but I think we need theory, we need thinkers, we need.
Yeah, we need more people like Denis to. Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. He was a clinician, then he became sort of a physicist, and now he's just thinking wildly about theories about how the brain is organized. And it's wonderful that people need to be a little bit more less guarded and more bold in putting things out there, putting ideas out there to be
It's
tested.
okay to have a wrong theory because if it's wrong, you can always correct it.
Yeah,
If it's correct, it makes like great progress for everybody. Uh,
yeah,
but if you don't have a theory, or if you have one and you don't speak it out, then it's just lost.
that's true. Exactly. Exactly. So, okay. So, all right. So there's another really beautiful paper. I'm just going through these papers. That this one also caught my eye. It was also pretty high impact. It was in communications biology and in Nature Communications Biology, subcortical and neurochemical organization of the ventral and dorsal attention networks. And what I really liked about that, first of all, the ventral attention network is typically working with Maurizio Corbetta sort of helped pioneer this idea that ventral attention networks is more externally triggered, and dorsal attention network is your internal attention. It seems that you sort of characterize for the first time these two different networks with structural connectivity, and then you correlate it also with doing receptor imaging, looking at the nicotinic receptor and dopamine transporters in subcortical areas. And so, do you want to talk a little bit about that paper? Because I thought it was a nice collection of different types of data that sort of helped sort of solidify this.
So this is typically the kind of work that is only possible thanks to open science and people sharing their data. Otherwise, we'll never be able to collect all this information. But so the question that we've been trying to assess in this one and in a previous one that we did in the default mode network is like, can we, as anatomists, revisit one by one each of those functional networks, characterize precisely their anatomy because there is a lot of discrepancy in the literature. Explore their subcortical structures for people that just want to implant electrodes or want to know more. They need to have like a precise characterization of that, the white matter connections, and most recently, because those maps of receptor are available, we can characterize them. So we plan to do a paper every 2 years on different systems and try to explore that. And we invited Maurizio because he's the one who described those networks, and that was fair to have his input, and he's been very helpful with this. One thing is the identification of the subcortical areas. It's only been possible because we use this functional realignment that was used. I forgot the authors. They did that for this cowboy movie where they align all the functional activation together. And this is very convenient because then you see very well subcortical structures is sharply
Wow.
delineated.
Yeah.
And then you can really play. You can be like, okay, so what is the connective anatomy of those structures, and you rebuild your system together. And then we thought like we wanted to add like some receptor architectonic because Pedro's is a medical doctor, and we singing, and I did my postdoc at the Institute of Psychiatry, where you realize that people like give drugs to real humans that are supposed to influence it, those different systems. So by having really the receptor signature of different networks, you can think about a different way of treating patients. So you take, for example, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. When we did a functional connectivity analysis on these patients, we published this paper in 2017. We didn't find reduced connectivity. We find hyperconnectivity in the ventral frontal parietal system. And that's interesting because actually they are captured by different things all the time, and the balance of moderation of attention with a top-down system is completely off and overwhelmed by this ventral system's going to capture them all the time. Psychiatrists used to give them like stimulants in the morning so that they get really excited, and then it deplete completely the system in their brain, and the rest of the day they can actually focus. And that's probably the way it works. And so finding those nicotinic receptor in the ventral frontal parietal was actually very encouraging, that we're on the way to provide like very valid information for people to support pharmacological studies and investigations, and
Yeah.
being really functional MRI with the clinic in a way that was not possible before.
Right. So it confirms that, right, these networks sort of terminate in these subcortical structures that usually are the ones acted upon by, you're right, this medication or whatever. And it seems that at the subcortical level, there's this sort of control in some sense. And it's, I mean, that's the first step, but it's actually, I mean, I imagine it'll be very difficult to, I mean, so I was, looking at what you did. It seems that, right, you have to take multiple subjects and average it. It would be interesting to, I mean, I think my personal feeling is that so many psychiatric disorders and attention disorders are all pretty much subcortical. I'm sort of, maybe that's not too bold of a statement, but still trying to get at this robustly. Do you think that it can be done with some combination of MRI and maybe PET or something else, or how far do you think this technique can be taken to look at, like, for instance, individual subjects? Would you find differences?
I see. Yeah, no, it's a very good question. It works in average, but fMRI is yet too noisy to be able to be translated at the individual level. But you can understand the average profile of the disease, and then create new strategy. But we're not going to bring it down to personalized medicine yet. That's the problem of fMRI. Really, there is a lot, unfortunately, a lot of noise. But hey, progress can arise, and we'll be ready to investigate that question.
Yeah. I mean, right. I mean, but I do think that it seems that so many papers, including this one, is sort of hints at, yeah, this subcortical,
Hmm.
right. I mean, and how is that balance struck in that regard?
If it's different in subcortical, it definitely had an impact onto the cortex afterwards because everything is connected. The funny part with this paper is we didn't find segregation between the dorsal and the ventral attention system in subcortical structures.
Yes. Yes.
We do see that with evolution. So you have this very old attentive system that was probably subcortical and expanded into the cortex and then split it into a dorsal and a ventral.
That's interesting. So with humans, it's sort of right. There's probably obviously I imagine there are differences, but it's either with below the resolution that you're looking, or there's it's
That is also possible that like the difference are like at a lower resolution or like it's embedded into different layers exactly like superior colliculus. You will look at it with a fMRI, you'll be like, oh, it's all the same, but then you look at it with a microscope, you're like, oh, okay, it is actually different
yes.
than I thought. So yeah, good point. There might also be a resolution issue.
Yeah. And I was trying to understand specifically, you were talking about lateralization of the networks, and you were suggesting that um, the lateralization predicts a degree of specialization, as there's differences in speed between left and right hemisphere. And also, I remember, and we'll get to your review article too, you talk about lateralization of language as well, and the idea that evolutionarily it's more efficient just to communicate in one hemisphere than use the corpus callosum. So do you maybe to talk a little bit about what new understanding you've gotten about lateralization?
So yeah, so there was originally the paper we referred to in the review is a paper that we published in Nature Communication in 2020. So we really wanted to see if regions that are more lateralized functionally are more connected by the corpus callosum or less connected by the corpus callosum, because you have both theory around. It's like, oh, it has to be more connected so that like the region that is functionally dominant can inhibit the other hemisphere, and then you have no, it has to be less connected because it's been evolving in isolation of the other hemisphere. That's a principle that is necessary so that you don't waste time communicating between the two hemispheres. Well, in order to demonstrate that, we had to produce this global map of lateralization of functions that was more complex to elaborate than we previously thought, as it is always. So we went on to Neurosynth and wrote a code to systematically download the entire database of Neurosynth. We kind of hacked Neurosynth. I'm sorry about that. It's great. It's a great work. And then we took it and we systematically look at all these maps that we cleaned up because there was like a lot of stuff that are not related to cognitive functions, whether they were lateralized or not lateralized for some bugs or after we symmetrized it. And then we checked with real fMRI whether what we had was real or stupid, because what is a neurosynth are meta-analysis. So it looked like the region that you find in asymmetry in neurosynth in terms of function match the one you find in fMRI, but you find more stuff with fMRI than you find with neurosynth, which makes sense because it's
Yeah.
analysis.
Yeah.
But there is no other way to globally assess lateralization of function and do meta-analysis. You're not going to scan people on everything.
Yeah. Exactly. It's
So we used that, and then we had a lot of asymmetry maps, and we plotted them into 4-dimensional space after like multiple mathematics. They give us a tetrahedron. We were so excited. Well, we have four main profile of lateralization that are symbolic communication, emotion, perception, action, which include attention, and decision making that we discovered was actually lateralized in favor to the right hemisphere, which was later validated in monkeys by Jérôme Sallet like 1 year after in PNS. So it was a great interaction. And then when we finally had those maps, we could measure whether the region that are lateralized are more connected or less connected by the corpus callosum, and they are less connected by the corpus callosum.
Interesting.
And,
Interesting.
it's true if you do a comparison between lateralized and non-lateralized. It's also true if you do a dimensional relationship. So you have a correlation between how lateralized is a voxel functionally and the connection with the corpus callosum. And we repeated the same analysis in the left and the right hemisphere, and it's been replicated. You get the same correlation in both.
That's interesting, and it seems to suggest that, as you sort of say in your paper a little bit, and also I'll talk a little bit about your review article, that yeah, I mean, to me at least, it seems to suggest that, and I agree that, I mean, maybe evolutionarily right to solve this need for more rapid communication. You can't rely on the corpus callosum. You have to sort of like, the functions become specialized in one, connected by tracks that are potentially more efficient or whatever.
Apparently, but you always have those exceptions. I was speaking with Yanni Fassaf, and I think you have this bat that has a small brain and no corpus callosum, just because nature sometimes tries out stuff.
Went down another path that
I think David Venison last week, he was like, "Oh yeah, the bigger the brain, the more you have groove and circumvolutions." I was, yeah, but look at the spider monkey, or that was a crab-eating monkey or spider monkey. I think it's a spider monkey that has such a circumvoluted brain, and it's a small brain. But that doesn't mean the theory is not true. It's like you always have those exceptions that, for some reasons,
yeah, that's very cool. That's so interesting, even in itself, to study that. I mean, the brain from this evolutionary standpoint. But so before I get into your just last paper, in a general sort of way, I'm still, and it's probably true, but has it ever been verified? Like, for instance, the strength of a connection typically is inferred by, the track, number of fibers or the track thickness. Has there ever been, I mean, it's hard to verify, experimentally, but I guess that's the assumption, right? That the thicker the tracks, the stronger the connections. And
right? Well, it's based on the diffusion properties. So if you have like technically, if you have more water that follows the path of your track, it is probably because it is thicker or got a higher caliber or got more fibers going in that direction.
yeah, I guess I'm more thinking of in terms of, right, there's this, number of neurons, but then maybe the bandwidth is higher. But I mean, it comes down to sort of just coming up with terms of like connection strength. I mean, that could mean a lot of things, but
It can be a lot of things. That's a problem of like all the semantic that is used in the field. It's a real issue. I would stay away from the number of streamlines that are like highly variable according to crossing, and if your patient or your participant move, you might have more or less. If you have a stroke in the left hemisphere, you have more streamline in the right hemisphere. Those streamlines didn't grow. They just start crossing with other streamlines, so you see them more. The same problem with functional connectivity. If you have a lesion in the left hemisphere, say you knock off completely one network, then the ratio of correlation in your voxel is going to change, and you might have an increase of like correlation in other networks just because it is not blurred with this other signal. But yeah, we were surprised to see. Well, the theory that we wanted to push forward a little bit is like we've been focusing so much on the neuron, but like really the sum of the neuron is spatial organization, cytoarchitecture. This is really what is the basis of function. And I usually start my slide with that. I show like two neurons in a petri dish, and you put them alone, and the only thing that they want to do is connect together. And if you think about it, if you remove that connection, they're exactly the same neuron. It's really the way they communicate with other things that defines who they are. So in this way, we provocatively in science say that you have emergent properties in the brain, and it's really supported by the connections, which is something that we're trying to measure now with. with new statistical approaches. It's really difficult, but it's exciting at the same time because I feel we're doing something, measuring with methods that were not available before, new things.
Yeah, and I guess that sort of leads into your review article. I mean, you sort of talk about this a little bit. Wonderful review article. I recommend everyone read it just to get a perspective of the field in general. The emergent properties of the connected brain in Science, 2022. You and Stephanie Forkel were the co-authors. You were the first author, and there's so much. I mean, the figures were so eye-opening in that paper. Especially, I really enjoyed the one where you actually put the function onto the tracks and you have this sort of white matter tracks, and you mentioned everything in terms of mapping the function onto the tracks. And another thing that struck me as well is characterizing the various disorders by their disconnections, either executive function or language. And there seems like there's so much more that could be characterized in that regard too. I mean, this is reviewing the literature in that regard. Yeah, so sort of turning the field on its head to talk about connections in this regard. So I guess my question is, so how is this? So this is an interesting, I mean, it's useful and it's an important way of looking at it. How is it? How should you think it should be used by the field in this regard? How is it limited by? How is the field limiting itself by not thinking of the brain in this way?
So this is a different theory. It's not really axons versus neurons, because those neurons have axons. It's absolutely not the point. It's about looking at the brain as interactions, or just looking at local change. And the completely different theoretical framework, but also completely different statistics. And then because when you do the correlation in fMRI, for example, you try to capture it, but it's still like a local correlation with a local region. So we try to integrate this with the method I mentioned to you, which is a functionectome. When you project and you force this integrative mechanism onto the white matter, and then you measure what comes out. Does it explain better function? Does it explain better symptoms? If that's the case, maybe the model is more appropriate and is more in line with the functioning or the true functioning of the brain. We're probably still very far from the true functioning of the brain. Well, it is step by step. So far, that's what we have in our lab, but maybe we're not as good as others as doing those voxel correlations. But I think it's an important, different vision to explore. And it also, because we are at the era of open science, it also offers a possibility for everybody to revisit the data or the data of others with this new theoretical and methodological framework, and actually test if they have better results and produce papers for cheap expenses.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I completely agree. And it occurs to me also that in terms of exploring individual differences, it seems that you're talking about in terms of pathology that's related to disconnections, but it seems that, like, for instance, when you map fiber tracks across individuals, and I know Stephanie has done this as well, is that you find a lot of differences, and it maybe I'm wrong in terms of intuiting this, but it seems that, at least from what I've seen, the white matter tracks are potentially maybe a more sensitive measure of individual performance differences. For instance, like maybe in language, the latopsychologists uh, uh, might be thinner or more tortuous or something that and might translate to behavior. I mean, I don't know if it's better or worse, but I think that it seems that just interpreting differences in behavior on functional, like the size of the nodes or the activities, is one step away from potentially looking at the tracks themselves, and that might be more sensitive.
Uh, well, there are several reasons for that. Like, we looked. So I've been working for 15 years with Steph. So, and the first thing that we did when she came in the lab, we just checked like how reproducible is one modality compared to another, just to know a little bit what we're measuring. And it's true that fMRI is very noisy. It's less reproducible. Like you take the human connectome project, the motor task, just a group average activation between test and retest, get 60%. of similarity. You do the same thing with a white matter track, you get 99% of similarity. So the method in itself, is more noisy. That's one thing. And then there is also a process of like bringing it into the MNI space, which was not possible for a long time with diffusion. So we did anatomical dissections of those tracks. And because you spend a long time being sure that you have exactly the same connection between all your participants, you have a finer measure of your structure that tends to correlate probably better at the individual level because you spend more time doing it at the individual level. And then finally, you're looking at those connections that bind together regions that are like it's very expensive in terms of evolution to have those long tracks. So they very charge into primary crucial information that have to be quickly exchanged between brain regions and probably have a very strong relationship with the behaviors that we observe. And so those are three reasons that make it like very, very good to capture individual differences, we think.
So, just to shift gears a little bit. So, as of this recording, about a week ago, Neuroimage, all the editors resigned because of the high APCs. It's in the range of 3,500. So yeah, they left. They're starting a new journal called Imaging Neuroscience, I believe, and Neuroimage will keep on going in some way. But so, what is your take on this? You're the editor in chief of Brain Structure and Function.
Right away, I get like people writing to me, and then my publisher like contacted me to know whether we wanted to do the same thing.
Everyone-
And I salute really the courage of like the editor of Neuroimage for doing this, because that also give us some leverage to every other editors to discuss clearly with our publisher what are the issues and what will happen. I'm personally not for fully open access journals because I think it changed the business plan of journals in itself. That can be potentially threatening for science in the way that a successful journal is not anymore a journal that publish very good papers and gets subscription to the library or the university. Now it is a journal that publish more in terms of economical perspective. And you see it like the publisher are like, oh, you got to do 20% more, 30% more this year. You make 30% more of what?
right, right. It's not really shouldn't be the goal, right?
No,
Exactly.
but these people they just see the money, and practically because authors they have to pay to publish, reviewers review for free, associate editor find reviewers for nothing or sometimes just a very little bit of money. Editor in chief makes more money, but they spend a lot of time on this, but that's not a lot of money either.
Right.
And then I don't know how many levels there are above this, but kind of feel like a pyramid scheme, like when people are selling cream, you gotta buy the stock, and then you'll get higher later on, and you'll make some real money. So it is a overall crisis of the publishing industry. It's great that we're kicking back. I'm worried. We've seen Aperture and the difficulty we went through. I wish people would be like lumping together into already existing initiative, and it's not because I'm chair of HBM that I'm saying this. It's because it's difficult to create a new journal. It'll be better to be all together than splitting and taking more risk of failing. But that's my point of view about this. And now regarding brain structure and function, we're still an hybrid journal. That means that anybody who want to submit a paper to brain structure and function and be on subscription, which means they can also share the paper with whoever they want.
Yes.
They want.
Yeah.
They publish for free. There is no APC at all. It is like €0. I think it's great because we can invite people for special issues. We can have students that can publish their ideas, and there is no monetary involvement into this. But that also allowed me to tell my publisher last week, because they're trying to push us to become fully open access, that if we were to become fully open access, I would quit. the same issue. It's like it's 3,000. We want to pay 3,000 euros to publish this paper. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah. So that's interesting. So you are, so just to clarify that you, so how do you actually, so people can submit, and so it's not technically open access, but it's, but people can still share and
Well, it's always been like that. So if you publish on subscription, if people like write to you because they want, they want to reprint, you can send them the PDF. That's what. And I think in your contract you can also keep like a auto copy on your personal website. And then we know like ResearchGate try to abuse that clause of the contract. Then your personal website is on ResearchGate and you share all your papers. That was very smart. I know that Elsevier has been fighting a lot with ResearchGate. Springer has not. That doesn't mean these are good people. They're probably not as bad, and that will be the difference. I'm gonna get fired. Uh,
well, no, I think it's important to talk openly about this because, yeah, I mean, it's, you have these businesses, and their
mhm.
job is to, survive and make money, and they have the market, and they'll keep on charging it as long as people pay, and I really hope that, it seems like inevitable that the field of publishing is evolving, and I don't know if it's completely open access, or some other hybrid of because I think like, for instance, selling subscriptions to libraries might be fading because there's no longer, weighted value in printed copies. But it's going to be interesting to see how this evolves. It seems very turbulent now, and it seems like things are changing relatively
People are
quickly.
trying to find the right model, but once the right model emerge, everybody's gonna adopt it. Uh,
Exactly.
but I was surprised to see because they said like the new journal Imaging Neuroscience was non-profit, but there is a partnership with MIT Press, which is not a non-profit company. So I wonder how this work out in terms of.
Well, that's interesting. I don't know if MIT Press, being a university-related press, is necessarily. It still might be nonprofit, but I don't know. I actually don't. I assumed it just was,
You,
but
they do books and
yeah.
they must have like the same issue as any publishing. I mean, people that are not in science but are in business are like, how are gonna increase our margin?
That's
And,
true. That's
um,
true.
and yeah,
Yeah,
the,
it might be a different policy with books or something. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, it's still, and the reality is, even if it is nonprofit, I mean, that's the cost of producing these is still, if you really want to do it right, it's can get still kind of expensive. And
so because I'm worried because like I've seen as a chair for HBM people being with a lot of goodwill and great ideas and creativity and they all come together, but it becomes being too big and it's difficult to handle and practically make instead of going step by step progressively. This is a professional deformation, I guess. We always want to think big. But so I've seen this tweet that stated right away that low to middle income country will not pay article processing charge in imaging neuroscience, which is a great initiative. It's fantastic. But is it like a bit early to, advance free publishing? Well, we don't even have, well, I'm not part of this, but they don't even have a budget and, there is a balance to, and if that's to reject papers because they don't have enough money this year, is that, becoming a bias? It's a very complex matter.
I'm sure I'll iterate a number of times, and
I,
hopefully,
I applaud the initiative and I find it very courageous. It's going to
yeah.
take a lot of time and a lot of effort, but this is going in good direction to have a positive impact in science. And,
Let's talk about this year's OHBM meeting. And so you're the president, and I have to say, personally, I think that you've done an amazing job with leading the group, leading the
how I
society.
feel, but I do appreciate. I do appreciate. It's, yeah, that you don't have a training for being OHBM chair, so you can like discover as you go. It is not what I thought it was.
Well, I'm interested in that. I mean, I served as president back in 2005 or six, but it was the society was totally different. not totally different, but it was a lot less overhead in terms of,
Right.
things have expanded. And so I'm kind of curious what your perspective. I mean, I know that when that was announced and you said some words at the past meeting, you mentioned, oh, I'll be devoting, to stepping aside from certain responsibilities to devote
Yeah,
time to this. And how has it gone? What was?
I did. So of course, it doesn't reflect with the paper because those are papers that I submitted before. It takes like an high. So I'll probably have a little less publication next year. It is really difficult because you might think when you go for chair, which I was invited to apply for chair. I would originally apply for secretary, but that we reject because sometimes there are too many people and they ask me if I wanted to be chair, which I honestly thought that they asked me to candidate for chair because they had somebody higher up. They wanted, they wanted a second-hand young candidate to lose so that everybody would be like, that was a nice attempt. He will get it maybe later. And then I became chair, so I had to do the job, which I take very seriously. And then, like most of the work, is to solve problems, because there are like issues all the time that arise. Um, I'll give you a hot example, for example, that is linked with Neuroimage and the stepping down of all the editors. I've been contacted by Elsevier because they still want to have the prize.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Yep.
but then what are the consequences? Can we
Oh,
bring a new Neuroimage editor on scene to give the prize? How's the community is going to react?
oh, wow.
You know,
Nobody. Yeah. Oh my
we
gosh.
thought we should give a little time for Steve to present this new initiative because we do respect the
Yeah.
effort. Can we have those two people on the same podium?
Yeah, I noticed that there were four editors who seem to have crossed the picket line right now. I checked their website. It's like I don't recognize their names, but they're the editors, and so
That's crazy. And then so like what I said, and so you got to find a solution. So I pick up the phone, I call Mala, I was like, what do you think we can do? And then like what we're trying to do, and we didn't speak to Steve yet, but because those are papers that were accepted during the time he was editor in chief, it would be
yeah,
fair that he gives the prize, the award himself. So I've wrote back to Elsevier. I'm waiting for the answer, but those are like things that like take a lot of mind space.
oh yeah.
Um,
And there's so many things like that now. It seems that there's right. I mean, you're grappling with all kinds of kind of sticky things that balancing.
And then there is a part where I had no idea, but chair of OHBM, I received so many requests of recommendation letter for promotion. And each of those requests have to go through the entire resume and
Yeah.
the letter of motivation to write a letter that actually promote fairly this person for their promotion, and that takes a lot of time.
Yes.
I cannot let them down. I cannot be like, oh no, I'm not going to do this. This is
Yeah.
I didn't realize, but that is part of the job as well.
I mean, it's interesting. I just there's a thought there. I'm surprised that people. I guess they do. It's that if you don't even know who they are and they still ask you to write about. I mean, I guess there's a type of review for that sort of thing where you look up at their CVs and you study that.
Yeah, I don't
And,
know. I was,
ah,
because
that's
you have to be unbiased, so often you don't know those are, and yeah, that was a lot. And then there is also the stressful part of like handling committee of people that are like prestigious academics. They all know they have a good idea of what's going on and how we should do things. They don't all agree. They want to speak about a lot of things that are important and higher up, but not the simple things that like we actually have to solve. You got to monitor that timely and efficiently, trying not to be a dick. It's really difficult. It's really difficult. It's yeah, I find it like really really difficult, and
Yeah.
And then there is the organization of the meeting itself, which we're trying to make it entertaining and fun, because I think it's important that people feel comfortable and have fun, because through fun you get comfortable, you get creative, and you create new links with people.
Yeah.
If possible, not being tacky,
Yeah.
but yeah, that also monopolize a lot of mind space and the way we can do it in a good way. But it's getting together, except for the fact that we had to change the date of OHBM because we had the Grand Prix at the same time, which, despite what people say, we couldn't know in advance. Uh,
Yeah.
um, it's bad luck. We knew it happened the same month, but we prayed it wouldn't happen exactly at the same time, and it happened exactly at the same time. And then
Yes.
then the option was like asking everybody to pay 3 times the price for their room or move OHBM. We
Yeah.
tried to write to the Grand Prix and tell them we were here first. Gotta move your Grand Prix. Like with 3,000 people, we're very hungry, and they were like, "No, it's 300,000 people, 100 people to take every one of you." So we didn't do it. And fortunately, there was this date in July, which will overlap actually with it's a Fantasia conference,
Oh.
science fiction conference. So you may have like Ryan Reynolds
Oh,
eating
really?
at the restaurant right next to you.
Huh. Okay.
Try to
Okay.
get him. I tried to get him to do the opening ceremony at OHBM, but he told me he was too busy.
Ah.
Not gonna
uh,
be possible.
oh gosh. Okay.
So shame.
Yeah, that would have been fun. That who knows what he would have said, but
I know, I know. I was really curious about this. That's about it. Solving issues, trying to not make it laborious.
right.
And
Right.
I'm also assessing, as I said when I got elected, I'm assessing really the role and the importance of the executive office, because we pay a lot of money as the executive office.
Yes.
It's true.
Yes.
And then, so I've been treasurer in the past, and I assess every money that comes out of OHBM. And now that I'm chair, I'm trying to look at really the interaction and what is going on. And I know we pay a lot, but believe me, we could pay more if I was not stopping every request from everybody for having more of involvement of the executive office at different levels.
Yes. Yes.
And so I'm slowly realizing that we're doing it to ourselves. And that's because it's a very vibrant and creative society. We have a lot of ideas, we have a lot of committees, we want to do a lot of things. And that's going to sound bad, but I'm just going to say it. We do focus on the idea a lot, but not so much always on the implementation, for which we rely on the executive
Yeah.
office that gladly do it, but bill us for it. That's what is going on. If we were a society with like no executive office, we'll have to do the things ourselves.
Huh.
I'll give you a recent example. That I think that's a typical example. So we decided that the program committee doesn't go on site anymore to visit the venue of OHBM for carbon emission and environmental reasons,
Yes.
which is a great, again, big idea of like we don't want to pollute. But somebody has to go. So now
Yeah.
the executive office will have to go to do the part that the program committee should do on site.
Yeah.
Except that they won't meet with the academics, they won't make these connections that is required and necessary. So that will, I don't think, be as good as it used to be.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah. I agree. I mean, right. And yeah, the part of the president would be sort of like saying, well, maybe one member of the program committee, the chair would go or something like that, and as a compromise to. But yeah, but I mean, there's all kinds of solutions that you have to think about.
I don't know. I was, and maybe it's my fault, it's my personality, but I was under the impression that there is so much to do to make sure that everybody understand each other and they stay together and they reach consensus. So you have very little space to actually put your own point of view into things. You
Yeah.
try to, because if you start giving your own point of view in the debate, then you cannot orient the entire crowd of the committee, because they will be, oh yeah, but you defending your own point of view, or like
Yes.
that's
Yeah. That
it's
is so hard.
the judge and also advocate of something. Having said that, we managed to implement like the Dropbox subscription for Member Plus that I
Okay.
wanted to do, because we 3,000 members. I wrote to Dropbox and we negotiated a very significantly discounted price for unlimited space in the cloud.
Wow.
So
Wow.
so because we're not paying for Dropbox for all the members, because otherwise we'll be in negative. But we negotiated that at $120 a year. So if you choose to have your Member Plus, then you'll have access to Dropbox with unlimited space, which allow you to already save all your work and be sure that it won't be
Yeah.
around if somebody steal your laptop, which is really great. But
Yeah.
also share as much as you want of data results.
That's a great idea. I like that. It sort of fosters the open science aspect of it. And it's a sort of a perk that people get Dropbox.
Yeah,
So,
we wanted to get members more engaged, and so we did that. We did also OHBM around the year, which are like small events that we train to have online, that are like advertised to members so they can connect and assist to this. So
yeah.
that, like, being a member of OHBM is actually more than coming to the conference and having a discount. It's having a community that have that together, like, benefits from advantages that they could not have alone.
And there's so many things like that that grow. I mean, it grows exponentially in some sense because you have different, I guess, the special interest groups or committees that come up with ever more ideas, and um, and it's hard to then. It's great to have these ideas, but then to coordinate them and actually to turn it into a sort of a procedure that works and that will carry on. That's principled, but also practical. Yeah, it's such a there's
That
no it's yeah.
is not easy.
It's not an easy job. Back in 2005, I mean, it was sort of like, well, you have the program committee. We have, we just come up with a schedule and talk to the meeting people, and they it seems like things are good and good to go. And
But
but,
yeah, because in 2005 that was a meeting, but like the wish of everybody is to become a society of members, and
yes,
so we gotta carry on in that direction. I personally think that when things become too big, then they become really expensive and really hard to manage, and that's sort of what's happening with OHPM, and that's where the struggle is.
yeah,
We talk a lot about the price of registration with Trish and not Beth, because Trish left us. And I look carefully at that and trying to see where we can cut corners. But the fact is, you will think that the bigger the conference, the smaller the price per participant. But the other way around, big conference centers, they have mandatory obligated services that we have to
yes,
do the conference
yeah,
that are outrageously expensive.
yes,
Well,
yes,
when you do your small conference, which we used to do brain hack, 30, 50 people, even 100 people, you just do Uber Eat, and it comes down to very, very cheap
yes.
in comparison to the services that are coming with this big conference center. Yeah, I never realized that, and that's a big issue that I don't know how we can solve.
Yeah, because they have you sort of captive, like for instance, serving coffee or
That's
live
right.
streaming or the AV. It's all hugely expensive, and it's hard. You can't not do it, and so
A good example, because like every year, like people complain they want to have coffee all the time. And then we look at the invoice for a 1 hour coffee break, and we just like, it's not going to be possible. And so they
right.
think that we could like just prepare coffee and put it on the side, and that's all they want. But we're not allowed to do it. It's part of the contract, and we cannot even negotiate on those things.
Yeah,
It's very, yeah. There's a lot of misunderstanding. Um,
yeah.
There is also a lot of misunderstanding between the executive office and the membership and the executive office and the committee. So I'm pushing a lot the executive office to have every year a presentation with a committee like we did last year, where they expose their point of view as an executive office of where is OHBM, what we should do, what they think. Because
Yeah.
after that discussion, like people will be like, well, what about this thing I didn't agree with? And they can directly reply. Because there used to be a lot in the background, but they have a lot of decision and influence power on what we do. So they should be in the front sometimes so that we can directly interact, and that will release some of the frustration.
I agree. That's a great idea. That's a great idea because sometimes, right, there are blind spots that we have that we make assumptions and they're doing something and you're like, what's going on here? And then, yeah, having that's a wonderful idea, having this up front and having them present.
There is such a fast turnaround of the committee.
Yeah.
You've been here forever. You've seen people like, I don't know how you do it. You've seen people changing all the time. It's like by the time you're out, you actually figure out how it works.
Yeah, that's right. And you have a sense, but then the landscape changes a little bit. And so, yeah, one thing that I've noticed is that with OHBM, there's so many more, I feel like, right, there's so many more young people, which is a wonderful thing. That's, first time attendees, it's, yeah, I mean, the landscape changes and they all have different perspectives and what they want. And so it's so much fun being part of the community.
We're not younger. We're just getting older.
That's true. I don't think of myself as older, but then right when people come up to me and treat me like I'm old, I'm like, oh, what? Maybe I guess I'm old. This has been great. I'm really, I think the meeting, the OHBM meeting, and also the way that it's growing as a society, a year round type of thing is just wonderful. And I think your leadership has been true. I truly think it's been great because you've handled it with this, good balance of, at least from what I've seen, it's sort of the, you keep things in line, but at the same time, you keep things open for trying new things. And so that's a tough balance to.
It's really difficult. It's another, like the organization of this size, you can't be like to leave too much freedom into like we're gonna just go with the flow. So we said like any event that you want during OHBM has to be submitted through the system. It is not to reject roundtable or whatever. It is just register it somewhere. Be sure that we have everything, because then it's really difficult to juggle with the rooms and organize a conference as a whole.
Yeah.
Believe me, we still have those kind of events that pop in and people being like, oh, yeah, well, we forgot to see.
Yes.
But much less than before. So don't wake up 1 month before the conference. And that's a relief for the executive office. That's a relief for the program committee. In the end, that's probably less money we have to pay.
Yeah. This is true. Okay. Well, this has been great. I had a fun time looking at, not only your leadership of OHBM, but also just, looking at your work. And once again, this area of what you're pushing, I believe, I sense that not only is it, obviously really rigorous and important, but it's also, I feel it's tapping into, it's sort of as a creative aspect to it. That's sort of trying to, really focused on trying to get a truly deeper understanding of how the brain is organized itself, as opposed to just doing the next thing. And I think your impact on the field has been wonderful. I'm sure it will continue on. And,
I hope.
All right. Well, thank you again. And once again, I appreciate you spending the time.
I had a great time. Thank you.
Neurosalience is brought to you by Organization for Human Brain Mapping. This episode is produced by Ömer Faruk Gülban and Alfie Wern.